Very delighted to be spending some time with Norm Hitzges, who's been in the Dallas-Fort Worth TV market for over 30 years now, covering the Cowboys. How many of these training camps have you been to now, Norm?
Oh, Lord, Bryan. My first one was 1972 at Cal Lutheran, if that tells you. That's enough, Bryan. We don't need to go back into addition and subtraction here, do we?
We'll let it go at that. Talk a little bit. I asked Brad Sham about this. Talk about how things have changed then since the days when you first started covering training camp to what you're dealing with now.
You and I would have represented the electronic media coverage at camp back then. There wasn't anybody there. And there, you used to stand right on the sidelines with the players. They didn't tell you, there's a press section or anything. You'd stand right there and talk with the players as practice was going on and chat about stuff. And it's a different world, but it has to be a different world these days. And the enormity of camp coverage now is what astounds me. That with the blue and white scrimmage here Sunday, there'll be thousands and thousands of people out here. There's 6,500 at Jets camp to watch people in their underwear, basically, go through fake stuff. It's just the NFL has exploded, and the NFL has managed to make its sport almost a 12-month sport, basically. And training camp is yet another example of that.
It's amazing to see how things have changed. I know I went to training camp back in the Danny White days, back in the early 80s there, and had lunch with you a few times at the training table there of all places.
But all things change, and I'm just wondering, having come out here, why this isn't the permanent location for Cowboys training camp. Where they could put a little more permanent facility in. This weather is perfect. I can imagine a better place to train. Everybody seems to enjoy being here, and I hope that the Cowboys actually do say, this is it. We're going to come here, period.
What are the realistic expectations a Cowboys fan should have for this football team this year?
Well, the first realistic expectation is that we shouldn't be embarrassing defensively like we were last year. This club has committed an enormous amount of assets. They have spent on 3 free agents. If you count the trade of Mo Claiborne, of draft choices 1 and 2 for him, they used a 1, a 2, a 3, 2 4s, and a 7 on defensive players. That's 9 drafted defensive players, 3 more signed in free agency, and Bruce Carter, the number 2 pick from the year before, finally healthy again. That gives the Cowboys realistically 10 new defensive players. This club was lucky to finish in the middle of the pack last year defensively. It played a very soft schedule, honestly, and the good teams often shredded this team. Defensively is where this team has got to improve, and it should improve. I think Cowboy fans should realistically expect this team to be in the top 8 in the National Football League in defense, and if it isn't, I would consider this a disappointing year for the defense.
Wow, okay, and then offensively, only 5 rushing touchdowns. When they got inside the 5-yard line, it's like they hit a stone wall last year. Do you see anything changing this year?
Well, there's hope that the middle of the offensive line is better, Bryan. There's hope that it is. Their moves in the middle of the offensive line for the free agents Livings and Bernardo have been greeted basically with yawns around the National Football League. Now, this is one where you say your scouts, and obviously Bill Callahan, the new offensive line coach, is on board with those moves. Whether they'll work or not is another question. In retrospect, when you look at who played in the middle of the offensive line last year and how bad it was, it is almost amazing the number of yards that Murray and Jones combined for. It is almost amazing the season Romo had, given the middle of the offensive line was a very weak area. If that has been shored up, then there's even more hope for Cowboy fans.
Wide receiver situation seems like it is wide open beyond Miles Austin and Dez Bryant, and even Dez, you don't know how many games you're going to get because of his issues with the NFL. Does that concern you? I mean, it looks like a very thin group right now.
Boy, it better concern this club. I don't think the number 3 wide receiver is on this team right now. I think hoping that Kevin Ogletree will miraculously step up and seize this job and be a major contributor, because the number 3 wide receiver on this team is a major contributor. The leading touchdown scorer on the Cowboys last year was the number 3 wide receiver, Robinson, and he's gone. Tony Romo came to trust Robinson. I can't imagine he has a tenth of the trust in the receivers out here right now. Doesn't mean he won't develop that. It also doesn't mean the number 3 wide receiver isn't here now. You also made a point about Dez Bryant's availability. He's facing potential discipline. He has been dinged in his 2 years. Miles Austin has been dinged a bit in his career. A horror story for the Cowboys would be no one steps up to take the number 3 job and then one of those 2 gets hurt. That would be a horror story.
Another area that people aren't paying a whole lot of attention to is how much the Cowboys may miss a healthy Matt McBride. And obviously he was not healthy last year, but when he's healthy, he was a weapon for the Cowboys. And Jones is kind of scattering punts all over the field right now.
Chris Jones was good in camp last year. He did not take Matt McBride's job for the obvious reason that he's Matt McBride. Then McBride had his down year. There's still some concern about him physically. Jones came in and punted well in McBride's absence last year. I think Chris Jones is going to be okay. But there is no problem in the National Football League quite as unique as having a punter or a place kicker that isn't good. It changes your field position, and in the place kicker standpoint, thankfully Dan Bailey was very good last year, it changes the scoreboard. And you can look back at games and honestly say the Cowboys benefited last year when other teams got in that trouble. Hey, Washington should have beaten Dallas twice last year. Dallas, if Washington's kicker simply makes 2 field goals, Dallas finishes 6-10. Mm-hmm. I mean, you look at it that way. So I think there are fingers crossed for Chris Jones here that they found a good player. But if they haven't, you're right, it's another concern.
How do you feel about the way the organization has dealt with the Dez Bryant situation?
I think by Jerry not even meeting with Dez Bryant for over 3 weeks, it sent, in my estimation, a horrendous message. Jerry is in charge of this franchise entirely. Nothing gets done discipline-wise without Jerry. Nothing gets done of a major nature of any kind without Jerry. That somehow Jerry would go nearly 3.5 weeks without meeting with Dez and then tell us at the opening press conference, well, I don't know why I haven't met with him. I'm sorry, but that sends a message that Jerry didn't think this was terribly important. And I know the franchise says everything to the opposite of that. Oh, this is terribly important, this is important. Hey, then why wasn't Dez with Jerry immediately afterwards? Why not? I'm concerned in that Dez Bryant is a young man who needs discipline. He has obviously had a massive amount of problem disciplining himself. It does not mean he's a bad young man. It means he needs guidance. And this off-season, while the club tells us, no, he's gotten so much better, you wouldn't believe he's gotten so much better. There was the incident with Lil Wayne's entourage in Miami. There was having to go to court because he'd piled up so many moving violations, he'd lost his driver's license. There was the thing with his mom, and who knows what went on there or what's going to happen, but you keep hearing the right things, but you don't keep seeing the right things. You keep hearing he knows the patterns, finally. You keep hearing he's showing the meetings on time. You keep hearing he knows where to line up. We've got to start seeing those things from Dez Bryant. And I know the Cowboys desperately need him on the field. But the first thing they need Dez Bryant to do is to turn 13 years old as a human being. There's no question of the negativity of his growing up. But he's a 24-year-old man who's got a huge job on a huge in-the-spotlight team in the National Football League. At some point, just where do we expect Dez to grow up is my question.
It's a real good question, and nobody's got an answer yet.
No, and my worry is that by some of the signals we've sent, the signals are those of an enabler. And I'm not saying you should be slapping Des around, but when this happens and the guy who runs everything hasn't met with him for more than 3 weeks, what signal does that send?
Do you think that Jason Garrett went to Jerry and said, let me handle this, I've got this?
Nobody goes to Jerry and says that, first of all, I don't believe. And if Jason Garrett had gone to Jerry and said that and handled it and came back and said, I want a 2-game suspension, whose decision would it be?
Jerry's decision.
It would be Jerry's.
Sure.
Jerry, what would Jerry base his decision on? I don't know, because he hadn't talked to Des.
Good point. Very good point.
I don't want to be too hard on Jerry here, but it's obvious that this club needs Des Bryan on the field. I think they are in just a little fear of what the commissioner might do to Des Bryant as far as suspending him, because the wide receiver situation, as we talked about, is not good. But at some point, Des Bryant, the people closest to Des Bryant, have to march Des Bryant into the reality of being a young man in the spotlight. And I just hope that happens soon.
Based on everything you've just told me, how many wins do you see this team getting? Do you see this team with any shot of making the playoffs?
The NFC is a rugged collection of teams. When you look at the NFC Central, you can see both wild cards coming out of the Central, with Green Bay, Chicago, and Detroit. You can see the Giants, Philadelphia, and Dallas being contenders. You can see Atlanta and New Orleans being contenders, real contenders for the wild card. There are several real contenders for the wild card here. I think you got to look at this team and say, we got to win 10. Now, can you answer the schedule? It is much tougher than last year. I don't know. I think this Cowboy team is going to improve. We could have a team that's improved and still go 8-8, given the level of competition. I think this club has an honest chance to be in the playoffs. I do. But what you hope is that the defensive changes and the interior offensive line is the difference in moving this team forward. And what you hope is that injuries don't strike certain key people, because the Cowboys do not have any answers for injuries at certain positions.
Norm, thank you very much. We love your work and have listened to you and watched you for years, and we just appreciate your time.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. It's good to see you.
Good to talk to you.